Welcome back to Revenge Plus, where revenge isn't just sweet, it's unforgettable. Let's dive into today's unforgettable story. I'm sorry, Sarah, we have to let you go. That sentence, it split something open in me. I heard it, but it didn't feel real. I sat frozen in that beige-walled conference room, my palms sweating against the cold laminate of the table, trying to make sense of the words coming out of Roger's mouth, my boss for over a decade, the man who once toasted me at the company's 10-year anniversary dinner. I blinked. What are you talking about? Roger didn't look me in the eyes. He glanced at the HR rep sitting beside him, then slid a white envelope across the table like it was poison. It's not personal, he mumbled. It's just restructuring. Restructuring, that word, like a guillotine dressed in a suit. 15 years. 15 years of building that company from the ground up. I joined when the office still had stained carpet and dial-up internet. I stayed late, I covered for others, I trained new hires even when I wasn't paid to. I memorized the damn printer codes because no one else ever bothered. I was loyal, and now I was nothing. I don't remember walking back to my desk. I think my legs just moved on autopilot. My coworkers all avoided my gaze, their screens suddenly fascinating. The silence was louder than any scream. I packed my things, a framed photo of my dog, the world's best problem-solver mug, a stress ball I never actually used, and walked out. No hugs, no goodbyes, no "we'll miss you, Sarah." The elevator doors closed, and for the first time in 15 years I was no longer part of something. I was just floating. 3 days later I saw it, the job listing. Now hiring. Operations manager, fast-growing company seeks dynamic, cost-efficient leader with a fresh perspective. My exact title, same department, slightly lower salary, they didn't even bother changing the bullet points. I wasn't let go because I failed, I was let go because I cost more than a newer model. Like I was an old appliance someone swapped out for a shinier one. I stared at the screen, numb at first, then angry. No. Not angry, furious. They didn't just fire me, they erased me. They replaced me with a cheaper copy like I was some outdated spreadsheet file. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, every memory of loyalty and sacrifice stabbing like a knife. My brain ran in loops. Why me? What did I do wrong? How could they smile in my face all these years and then dump me like I was nothing? What if they're right? What if I really don't matter? But around 3:17 a.m. something inside me snapped. Not like a breakdown, more like a spark. A flicker of something I hadn't felt in years, rage with direction. I got out of bed, opened my laptop, and started writing. Not a resume. A plan. A different voice started whispering in my head, not the desperate one that had been begging for validation all week. No, this one was cold, focused, clear. It said, they think you're gone, they think you're done, prove them wrong. What would happen if the person they threw away came back, not as an employee, not even as a competitor, but as the new owner? Is it insane to dream of buying the very company that betrayed you? Or is it the only kind of justice that actually means something? Let me ask you this, what would you do? If you had the chance to sit face to face with the person who fired you and tell them you're their new boss, would you smile? Would you forgive? Or would you show them exactly what loyalty costs when it's you who writes the paycheck? I didn't have the money, I didn't have the power, and I sure as hell didn't have the connections, but what I did have was clarity. For the first time in years, everything in my life felt like it had led to this moment. Every sleepless night, every missed birthday, every forced smile at a boss's joke, all of it had sharpened me into something harder, something colder. And speaking of bosses, let's talk about him. Roger Whitmore, VP of Operations. Clean suits, clean lies, clean hands because he always made sure someone else did the dirty work. Roger was the kind of man who smiled too much in meetings. He shook your hand a little too long. He called you champ when he was mad and kiddo when he was condescending. And for the longest time I didn't see him for what he was. I thought he was a mentor. I thought he saw potential in me. What he really saw was a workhorse. Loyal, tired, and too scared to say no, Roger had this way of saying your name like it was a question. Sarah, like he was always a little surprised you were still standing there. Like maybe he forgot why he hired you in the first place. But the worst part? It wasn't how he smiled while firing people. It wasn't how he flirted with the interns when he thought no one was watching. It wasn't even how he took credit for projects that were my blood, sweat, and weekends. No, the worst part was how good he was at pretending he cared. At the holiday party last year, he gave this big speech about family and gratitude while holding a glass of champagne someone else paid for. He said, "We're not just colleagues, we're a tribe." 2 months later, he fired Marie, a single mother with breast cancer, because her health made scheduling unpredictable. Roger didn't believe in tribes, Roger believed in numbers. He used people until their usefulness dried up, then cut them loose with that same empty smile and a quote from some business book he half remembered. You know what else he did? He laughed at me once. It was subtle, but I'll never forget it. We were in a meeting about restructuring, ironic, I know, and I brought up an idea about creating flexible work arrangements for older employees who struggled with tech. Roger chuckled, not loudly. Just a small exhale, like I'd said something adorably stupid. Then he leaned back in his chair and said, "That's sweet, Sarah, but this isn't a charity." It hit me like a slap. I'd spent over a decade giving this man everything I had, and he thought I was sweet, like a cookie, like a kitten. I should have seen it then. But I didn't, not yet. He kept climbing. And I kept working. That was the unspoken contract. Until one day he decided I was no longer part of the equation. But now I couldn't stop thinking about the look on his face the day he fired me. How he avoided my eyes. How he said it's just business, like that made it okay. And I couldn't stop wondering, what would his face look like if I was the one across the table next time, not as a victim, but as a replacement? You ever stare at someone and think, one day you'll answer to me? It's a dangerous thought. Addictive. It crawls inside your ribs and starts whispering ideas. It turns your coffee bitter. It makes you smile at people you hate because you're too busy planning their fall to waste time fighting. And the worst part? I started liking that feeling. Roger was the kind of man who always played the long game, or so he thought. But the thing about long games, some of us are just better at waiting. I knew his patterns. I knew his weaknesses. I knew the names of the shell companies he quietly funneled consulting fees into. I knew how much he depended on Lisa in accounting, and how he lied to her during the last bonus cycle. I knew his tells, the way he rubbed his temple when cornered, the twitch at the edge of his eye when someone questioned his numbers. Roger played the game like no one was watching, but I had been, for 15 years, and now I had nothing left to lose. That's a dangerous place for someone like me to be, but tell me something. Have you ever seen a man who thinks he's untouchable realize too late that someone's been keeping score? Because if you have, you know that look. And trust me, I planned to make sure Roger wore that look on the day I walked back through those doors. But not as Sarah the employee, not even as Sarah the former manager. No, I was coming back as something far more dangerous. As Sarah, the CEO. Now the question was, how do you buy the very company that threw you in the trash? And how do you do it without anyone knowing until it's too late to stop you? It started with a whisper. Not a dramatic revelation. Not some thunderbolt in the rain, just a quiet little what if that refused to leave me alone. What if I stopped mourning the job I lost, and started hunting the company that took it from me? I sat at my kitchen table that night with a blank notebook, a cup of stale coffee, and a heart full of unfinished business. The lights were off except for the stove clock blinking 2:03 a.m. The world was asleep, but my mind was on fire. I wrote one sentence: buy them out, burn them down, rebuild. I didn't even know what it meant at the time. I just knew I had to write it, and once I did, the dam broke. I pulled out my old work laptop, the one they forgot to remotely wipe. Amateurs. Within minutes I was inside the company's financial architecture. Not the high-level summaries they shared in meetings, the real data. The underbelly. Numbers don't lie, and these numbers screamed something no one had wanted to say out loud. They were bleeding money. Revenue was stable, but overhead was bloated. There were phantom consultants charging absurd fees. Advisory retainers that had no end dates. Expensive software licenses barely being used. Roger had been building a maze, not a machine. It was a house of cards, and I knew where every card was placed. Flashback 2 years earlier. I had been asked to spearhead an internal audit project. At the time, it felt like grunt work, digging through transactions, reconciling reports, chasing vague entries. But I kept notes. I always kept notes. Names, dates, amounts, odd patterns, unusual approvals. They brushed it under the rug once the quarterly report looked clean enough to spin, but I kept everything. Because part of me never trusted the way Roger smiled when he said, "Let's keep this between us." I didn't know back then what I'd use it for. But now, that dusty little folder on my hard drive had become a treasure map. Here's what I learned. The company was technically solvent, but barely. And only because it was propped up by a series of silent investors, old money types who wanted safe bets and stable margins. They weren't loyal to Roger, they were loyal to performance, and lately performance was slipping, so I made a list. Step 1, find the silent investors. Step 2, figure out who's unhappy. Step 3, make them an offer before the storm hits. Step 4, buy enough leverage to push Roger out. Step 5, walk back in through the front door. It sounded insane, delusional even. I wasn't rich, I wasn't powerful. I was just a woman with a vendetta and a file full of secrets. But the funny thing about secrets? In the right hands, they're worth more than gold, so I started making calls. Quiet ones, careful ones. I knew a guy from my early years, Mark Travers, now a venture analyst in Boston. We grabbed coffee. I floated the idea as a thought experiment. He asked for numbers, I gave him projections. He raised an eyebrow, leaned back and said, this could actually work. And just like that, the whisper got louder. I reached out to an old college roommate who now ran a mid-size private equity firm. She owed me. I once helped her rewrite a pitch deck at 3 a.m. in college that landed her first $1 million client. I cashed that favor in. 2 weeks later, I was in a boardroom wearing a blazer I hadn't touched in months, pitching the most unthinkable idea I'd ever conceived. We acquire the company, quietly, cleanly, strategically. I take over operations, you get turnaround profits, I get the throne. Some laughed, some passed, but 2 didn't. That's all I needed. I didn't need to own the whole company. I just needed controlling interest. And I knew something Roger didn't. He had made enemies, quiet ones. People he snubbed, manipulated, underpaid. People he called dead weight behind closed doors. People who smiled at him in meetings but cursed at him in elevators. Those people were waiting for someone, anyone, to pull the trigger, and I was holding the gun. Over the next few weeks, I built a shell company, nothing flashy. Just a name, a logo, a strategic investment division. I put someone else's name on the paperwork, I let others make the calls. But the blueprint, every line, every deal, every word, it came from me. They never saw it coming. If that revenge hit just right, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more epic comebacks and justice-served stories. Drop a comment below, I'd love to know what you would have done in their place. 'Cause who would? I was the woman they tossed aside. The sweet one, the predictable one. I wasn't a threat. I was a former employee, that's what made me perfect. We started quietly buying out the minority shareholders, one by one. Some didn't even ask questions, they were just glad to get out. A few were suspicious, but money talks, and the numbers we showed them painted a very convincing picture. We told them the company was shifting, that there'd be new leadership. A bold direction. They didn't know who I was, not really. To them, I was just a nameless strategist behind the curtain, but every move was mine. I stayed in the shadows because I wanted the reveal to be perfect. I imagined it every night, walking into that office, the same one where they handed me my severance envelope, and placing it back on Roger's desk, this time from me to him. I imagined his face when he saw the name on the merger document, when he realized the woman he threw out had been orchestrating his downfall from her kitchen table. But I wasn't ready to show my hand yet. Not until everything was in place. Because revenge, real revenge, isn't loud, it's patient, it's meticulous. It wears a smile while it rearranges your world behind your back, and I had been smiling for weeks. But here's what I hadn't accounted for. Roger wasn't stupid. Arrogant, yes, but not blind. He started sensing something. He didn't know what, but he felt the air shifting. There were closed-door meetings he wasn't invited to. Investors who stopped returning his calls. Budget lines that were suddenly frozen. He started circling. I knew I had to move fast before he figured out the name behind the mask. So I planned the reveal. One shot, one moment. The perfect stage, I would call a meeting. Invite the board, walk in, sign the final documents, and take the chair. But something deep down whispered, what if he fights back? What if he plays dirty? What if you're not the only one with secrets? And that scared me, but not enough to stop. Because at that point, I wasn't chasing justice anymore, I was chasing legacy, and I was done hiding. I chose a Thursday morning. Not because it meant anything, not because of superstition, but because Thursdays were always when Roger was most distracted, juggling investor updates, staff meetings, and his little power strolls through the office, pretending to care. It was also Bagel Day, and Roger never missed Bagel Day. I wore black. Not for the drama, not even to stand out, I wore it because it made me feel invisible and powerful at the same time. Like a shadow. Like I belonged in places they never expected me to be. The boardroom had changed. They'd upgraded the table. Polished chrome, leather chairs, the kind that squeak just enough to remind you they're expensive. I took my seat quietly, 3 chairs down from the head. No one looked at me yet. Not until I cleared my throat and said, "We'll begin when Mr. Whitmore arrives." Heads turned, a few of them knew, the rest were still catching up. One of the newer board members, Simmons, I think, gave me this polite little nod, the kind men give women they underestimate. I smiled back like I was about to serve him coffee, not corporate justice. Roger walked in 5 minutes late like always. He was holding his usual paper cup of burnt office brew, a folder under one arm, that arrogant glide in his step like the world still spun because he told it to. He didn't even glance at me, not right away. "All right," he said, sliding into the head chair, "let's make this quick. I have a call with Beijing in 20. He stopped, right when he finally saw me. I didn't look away. I wanted him to feel it, that flicker of confusion, that itch in the back of his throat, the sudden realization that something was off and wrong and not in his control anymore. I tilted my head slightly. "Hello, Rogers." "Sarah," he said, blinking. What are you doing here?" And right then I knew he had no idea. He hadn't pieced it together all those weeks, all those silent moves, all the whispers. He never once suspected the woman he fired, the woman he called sweet, could be the one pulling every string. I pushed the folder across the table. One document, clean, final, merger approval, CEO transition. Majority control, his name was nowhere on it. "You're being replaced," I said, keeping my voice even, effective immediately. He laughed, not a real laugh, that sharp, anxious bark men make when they're pretending they're still in charge. "You're joking, this is absurd, you don't own enough, you can't just waltz in here and—" I didn't raise my voice, I didn't need to. "Check the signatures." His hand trembled when he opened the folder. I watched his eyes scan the page. His smirk faltered, his lip twitched, his fingers clutched the paper like it might save him, like if he gripped it hard enough the words might disappear. This has to be illegal," he said. "You manipulated investors." "You—" "Correct," I interrupted. "I convinced them, I showed them a way out, I didn't manipulate, I exposed." There was a silence then, the kind that makes the air feel electric. He looked around the room. No one met his gaze. And that was the moment. That was the exact moment Roger realized he wasn't feared anymore. I wish I could tell you I felt triumphant. I wish I could say the taste of revenge was sweet, that I smiled and delivered some perfect one-liner. But the truth, I felt calm, still, like I had just returned something to its rightful place. "You can leave your badge at reception," I said softly, but he didn't leave, not yet. Roger stood up, puffed his chest, and looked straight at me. "You think this makes you better than me," he hissed. "You think this company will survive under someone like you." That's when I did smile. Because behind him, one of the assistants, the same one he used to mock for being too slow, was filming. Quietly, steadily, with a look in her eyes I recognized, justice. "I don't think it," I replied. "I know it, and so do they." Roger looked around again. The room was silent. Every eye had shifted, every power had realigned. And he wasn't in the center anymore. He wasn't even part of the orbit. When he finally left, he didn't say another word. But he looked back at me just once. Not with hatred, not with fear, with confusion. Like he couldn't understand how the girl he discarded had become the woman who dethroned him. And that, right there, that's what made it all worth it. But I wasn't done. Roger thought this was about a title. He had no idea what I had planned next. The office felt different after he left. It wasn't just the silence, it was the weight that had lifted, like the walls had been holding their breath for years and finally exhaled. People walked lighter, spoke louder, smiled for the first time without glancing over their shoulders. But I didn't have time to bask in the victory. Not yet. Because the moment Roger stepped out that door, I knew something deeper was coming. He wasn't the type to go quietly. He'd lost control, but men like Roger never lose quietly. I was ready for a counterattack. I expected it. But what I didn't expect was the envelope. It arrived 3 days later. Plain. Unmarked, slid under my office door like a threat whispered through a keyhole. Inside, copies of emails, old ones. Some with my name on the CC line, some marked confidential, all tied to a project we'd buried 2 years ago. Roger had kept them, and he'd handed them over to his lawyer. I could see the angle immediately. He was going to paint it as fraud, claim I'd manipulated financial data, that I'd hidden losses, that I'd breached my NDA when I used my internal knowledge during the acquisition process. It was clever, not true, but clever. And it would have worked if I hadn't been 10 steps ahead. You see, the thing about spending 15 years under someone like Roger, you learn to document everything. When he told me to fudge projections to impress stakeholders, I saved the audio. When he diverted funds from the wellness budget to pay for his executive retreats, I made backups. I had screenshots, voice recordings, buried Slack messages, even late-night voicemails from his assistant, panicked, rushed, begging me to make it disappear. He had tried to bury me with paper, but I had fire. So when the official legal notice came, a full-blown civil complaint alleging breach of fiduciary duty, intellectual property theft, and hostile manipulation of private capital, I didn't panic. I printed it out, stapled it neatly, and brought it to my lawyer. His eyes widened. "This is aggressive," he muttered. "He's scared," I said, and he was right to be, because I wasn't going to fight this behind closed doors. No, this wasn't just about clearing my name. This was about exposing his. We filed our response 2 days later along with a countersuit. I made it public. Within a week, financial blogs were buzzing. Former VP faces allegations of embezzlement, data tampering. One article even called it a stunning reversal of power, and they weren't wrong. In our filing, we attached everything. The offshore account tied to a fake vendor. The ghost payroll entries. The blacklisted supplier he mysteriously brought back, and the backdoor commissions that came with it. I'd waited years with this evidence in my back pocket, unsure of whether I'd ever use it. Turns out it was time. He tried to bury me under legal jargon. I buried him under facts. The court date was set. Media trucks waited outside. Roger tried to hold onto what little reputation he had left, issuing a weak press release about misunderstandings and false narratives. But no one believed him. And just when I thought I'd seen it all, someone sent me a tip. Anonymous, just a single line of text. "Check the 2018 audit. Line 14B." He altered it. I didn't recognize the number until I dug through my backups and found the internal ledger from that year. And there it was, a quiet change, a forged timestamp. $1.2 shuffled like a shell game right before quarterly reports, just enough to boost stock value and trigger executive bonuses, including his. I stared at the screen for a long time, then I whispered, "Got you." That piece changed everything. We submitted it to the judge. The motion went through. Suddenly, the case wasn't civil anymore. It had criminal implications. The Department of Justice got involved. A full audit was reopened. Roger tried to flee the country. He was stopped at the airport. Not arrested, not yet, but detained, questioned, humiliated, and more importantly, exposed. The man who once controlled every room he walked into was now just another headline. And I walked through the office like a ghost turned flesh. Like someone who had stepped out of the shadows not just to survive, but to lead. People started calling me the Iron Widow. I didn't correct them because they weren't wrong. But still, deep down, there was one thing left I hadn't decided. Would I let him fall completely, or would I be the one to finish it? He didn't fall all at once. No, Roger Whitmore crumbled in layers like a tower that didn't know it was already hollow inside. First came the material collapse. The board froze his severance. His golden parachute, the one he once bragged about during dinner parties, vanished in a clause he'd never bothered to read. The company seized the executive car, the condo allowance, the card he used to buy $400 lunches just to impress people who secretly hated him. His accounts were audited, his assets were flagged, his savings dismantled by legal fees and back taxes. Next was the reputation. His face was everywhere, but not how he liked it. Headlines called him the smiling thief. A case study in corporate rot. No one returned his emails. The same people who once laughed at his weak jokes now ghosted him like he carried disease. Former allies denied knowing anything. Industry groups quietly scrubbed his name from memberships. Even LinkedIn locked his profile due to inconsistencies. But the final blow was internal. I heard from someone, a janitor of all people who used to clean his floor, that Roger started coming to his apartment window at night, just standing there. Lights off, not moving, just standing. Like he was staring at something no one else could see. They say he talks to himself now, tells stories to no one, still insists it was all a misunderstanding, still blames me, but deep down I think he knows. He's not haunted by what I did to him, he's haunted by the moment he realized it was his own hands that built the noose. The rest of us just watched him pull it. The office was quiet again, but this time it wasn't fear, it was focus. People moved with purpose, teams collaborated instead of competing. There were no more whispered rumors, no more power plays in the hallway. For the first time in a long time, the company breathed, and I didn't just rebuild it, I redesigned it. We scrapped the useless bureaucracy Roger had clung to like armor. We gave real decision-making power back to the teams. We ended the Friday performance humiliation meetings he loved so much. We created a new fund, one that covered healthcare emergencies, family leave, even mental health stipends. Some people cried in their cubicles when they read the memo. I hired back 3 people Roger had fired during his worst years. Marie, the single mother fighting cancer, was one of them. She now runs our wellness division. She hugged me so tightly the day she returned, I thought my ribs would crack. And me, I moved into Roger's old office. Not because I wanted the view, but because I wanted to change what it meant. I kept his chair. I didn't replace it. Not out of sentimentality, but as a reminder. Every morning I sit in it for exactly 10 seconds. Then I stand up, walk to the window, and open it wide. Let the air in. Let the past out. One day, a junior employee knocked on my door. He looked nervous. Young. Said he'd heard the story, how I took the company back, how I exposed the corruption. He asked me if it was true that I planned it all from my kitchen table. I smiled. I didn't plan to win, I told him. I just refused to lose quietly. He stood there for a moment, then asked something I wasn't expecting. How do you know when it's time to fight back? I thought about it. Then I walked over to my bookshelf and pulled out a small object, one I kept since the day I was fired. It was the envelope Roger had slid across the table. My severance. I never cashed it. I framed it. I handed it to the kid and said, "When something like this no longer breaks you but builds you, that's when you know." He didn't say anything else. He just nodded quietly like someone who had just been handed a map through the fire. And that's why I tell this story now. Not to gloat, not to brag, but to remind you every empire that falls starts with one person who says enough. So if you're watching this, if you've been overlooked, silenced, cast aside, if they called you sweet when you had steel in your spine, if they laughed while they fired you, then hear me. You are not done, you are not weak, you are not broken, you're waiting, and when your moment comes, don't knock on the door, kick it in. Let them remember the name they tried to erase. Let them sit in the quiet they created. And then let them watch you build.